What's up, everyone? Welcome into the Dear Miss Fantasy show with me, your host, Tera Roberts. This is the official mailbag show for PlayerProfiler. It is Wednesday, September 3rd. If you just heard some weird noises, sorry. I just realized that I had my mic all the way at the back of my table, and that's not effective, so I just moved it up. But I think we're all good to go now. And we're officially in week one. Oh my God, I know a lot of you have drafts going on right now because you like to wait until Wednesday so that you don't have to deal with all that player injury stuff. You get a nice, clean, clear-cut point of view there. So if you are drafting, maybe you're drafting live now and you're like tuning in to the show at the same time, ask any questions. If not, we're going to talk about week one start and sit prep. Topic, who can you trust? Because there is a lot of stuff to kind of break down with a bunch of players that have some question marks around them. So we'll dive into that. We'll do some, we'll start off with some injury news and notes as well, because I really want to talk about some of the ones that are more pressing, right? I don't want to talk about we've talked ad nauseum about the Joe Mixon and Chris Godwin, right? Okay, we know all of the long-term injuries that are starting off the season with a certain amount of time out. I want to talk about the ones who are in question for week one with those short-term injuries, or those ones that were kind of like on the cusp there. So we'll do that. And then we'll dive into some mailbag questions because you guys came through with the mailbag questions. And of course, if you have any questions in terms of things that you want to ask live on the show, feel free to jump in the chat and ask away. I'm going to jump in and say hi to the chat real quick. Hi to Amazon Pancakes. Love the name. Hey to Fantasy Football 2025. What's up? Thanks for tuning in. Oh, and then Amazon Pancakes is torn between defenses to stream. That's a good question. I was actually just about to look at defenses because I was doing my DFS player pools and going into defenses, which is a little bit different than streaming because a lot of times that's pricing dependent there. But in terms of streaming options for defense, it's going to vary because when I'm seeing like from platform to platform in terms of where you're drafting, I mean, the ADP for defenses is all over the board, right? Like I waited comfortably to the last round of my family league draft that I did on Sunday and grabbed like Kansas City's defense. You basically you're just kind of taking whatever here. I know it's pertinent news right now, but honestly, not an ideal matchup. But if you have to dig in terms of looking for streaming options that on defense that is maybe going to get you some points, there will be points scored in the Green Bay-Detroit game, but Green Bay creating turnovers actually makes them a very interesting streaming option for the entire year. They have the ability to put up points in terms of getting turnovers, sacks, all that good stuff. So they're an option there. Miami's defense is also interesting. Playing against Indianapolis, Daniel Jones, always good for some turnovers and whatnot. That's good. And then Seattle is another one. I think that even though San Francisco obviously is very potent on offense, Seattle's defense, I think, showed very well in preseason. And I think we could finally be seeing that defensive turnaround that we kind of expected them to be under their coaching staff, very defensive minded. And so maybe we could lean into that because they did look much improved here. Much improved here. Jerry Nelson commented, Cardinals defense, picking apart the Saints this year. Yeah, that's another good one as well. And then Amazon Pancakes said, grab the Rams defense and thought about the Packers or the Patriots. Patriots is also a fine option. I think Rams defense is okay. The thing about that one is it's got a lower point total. I think it's like 44.5. Now, granted, there are not any massive point totals in terms of going over 50. Everything's kind of flat this week just because it's week one. But at the end of the day, the Rams defense is another defense kind of like the Packers where you can put points up on them, but they're a defense that can actually score points, right? Just because they've got those aggressive linemen, Jared Verse. It's something that they can actually do to, show pretty well from a fantasy perspective. So I'm in on them as well. But before I dive into some more questions in the chat, and feel free to go ahead and drop those in there. Wanted to go over some quick news and injury notes stuff right there. We're starting off week 1. So obviously, again, we're talking about guys that we want to pay attention to, particularly for week 1, not for draft purposes, because most of you listening to this, unless you're listening live and drafting right now, you'll be done with your draft if you did a Wednesday draft by the time you listen to this. So I'll start us off with a fun one. Stephon Diggs, Mike Vrabel said, I think it was yesterday that he said this, but said as of today, he'll be out there. We heard that there's not going to be a snap count on him. That was the key that I was looking for, because I knew he was going to be out there, right? We all knew he was on track to start the season. It was a matter of how much of a workload they were going to give him to begin with. So to hear specifically that they're not going to have a snap count on him, thank you so much, guys, for sharing that. He's a flex option. Kenneth Walker, there's been news around foot soreness for him, and that's kind of made people turn their eyes a little bit to Zach Charbonnet, because obviously that's a fun handcuff. And I like, a lot of times people like to think of Charbonnet as having some kind of standalone value, although I think Walker is really the dominating force in that offense. But again, it was concerning because we didn't see him in preseason at all. Sounds like he's on track. No issue there. Strong play at RB2. Jauan Jennings, calf injury, definitely more so contract injury there. We talked about this. Again, I told you guys there was not a lot of leverage that he had there. And again, similar to Jacoby Myers, at some degree, you just got to realize that you are a player that is in a situation that doesn't have the same kind of leverage as a Terry McLaurin or Michael Parsons, right? So Jauan Jennings back at practice. It's fine. He's a low-end flex play to me. You guys know that my preference there is Ricky Pearsall and George Kittle, obviously. Jennings is someone who I think will have fantasy relevancy. Again, flex option guy that maybe you want to be a little bit more cautious with, because again, we have not seen him throughout this preseason. So you get just a little bit worried because he was trying to stand his ground on that contract situation there, but does not appear to be any major injury concern. Jordan Love's thumb injury is not a concern that would hurt him from a passing perspective. It was not the passing hand. What we're more concerned about with the Packers injury is Jayden Reed. This is something that we have to pay attention to. The injury is a little bit more serious than they were kind of alluding to, and something that can be a nagging injury throughout the season. He's still not practicing. Supposedly, that is what they had planned for him. Take that as you will, and that he would start practicing later in the week. It's Wednesday. Okay, so we need you to start practicing tomorrow, at least on a limited capacity. If he does not, I start to get very concerned. At the end of the day, his presence is very important to two people. Obviously, Matthew Golden, number one there, being the guy that will benefit significantly. While there are other receivers in the offense, we've talked about the lack of reliability from the Green Bay receiving perspective. And Jayden Reed was definitely a part of that, right? But the opportunity for Matthew Golden to get out there and immediately operate as that wide receiver one is massive for him. It would make him a low-end flex play if Jayden Reed is out. So pay attention to that one, because I've got him in a few places. I wouldn't be playing him initially, but if we have the ability to get him as the wide receiver one in that offense immediately, yes, because then his only competition would be guys like Romeo Doubs, Dontavian Wicks. That's not major competition there. Also beneficial for Tucker Kraft, right? Another guy that I liked, talked about being one of my guys that I tend to wait on. Had a nice little ADP around tight end, 9, 10, 11, 12, depending on how it kind of worked out for you there and what your settings were in your league. But at the end of the day, it just gives him a nice base in terms of targets. And again, he is a strong red zone presence as well. So that ups in terms of him being reliable for us as a tight end starter. Khalil Shakir, this one is very interesting. He is practicing. It looks like he's close to playing. Was a little bit worried about him, that high ankle sprain. You get concerned because that is a multi-week injury, a very, very clear-cut timeline, and he was pushing right up to week 1. but it sounds like it's trending in a positive direction for him. And that's critical because Shakir is the wide receiver one of that offense. He would be a low-end flex option if he does play. Just kind of pay attention there to anything in details that we can kind of get around the snap count. Then Isiah Likely, this is not relevant to starting him. You were not starting Isiah Likely, but this is very critical to Mark Andrews, who you were starting, but will give you significant upside. So if maybe you were on the fence about Mark Andrews, you're maybe in a dynasty league and you've got Andrews and somebody else and you're making a decision there. Isiah Likely, probably not going to get him this week. The upside for Mark Andrews would be significant. He is a must play. And, very relevant from a DFS perspective as well. Then we got Josh Downs. That was somebody who was dealing with a hamstring injury, full practice, good to go. We don't need to worry about that. Najee Harris, very interesting, will be active. He had been speaking about really wanting to play, and you hear the player wanting to play. He hadn't practiced in a while. They're trying to ramp him up. You're like, oh, okay, I don't know if you're going to. But it does sound like he's going to be good to go. Now, to what capacity? That we don't know. I would still operate as Amarian Hampton getting the majority of snaps just because of the significant time off that Harris had. But it's good to see him out there on the field, especially after such a weird injury, fireworks injury. We know how those can often go for football players. We got one very specific reference of fireworks injury there. So I'm at least happy that it has not been a major issue for Najee there. So again, the only thing that I want to caution you about Najee, because, if he does have a limited workload and we see Hampton operating, let's say like a 70-30 split or a 60-40 split, I do caution you that just because we have not seen Najee, just be careful that you don't take the week one split as gospel, because it could be part of a ramp up strategy for him because of the lack of plays. So just keep that in mind, because it was a significant break there that he had for the injury. Darnell Mooney limited. That's critical. Pay attention to that. Obviously, Mooney has significant upside. I love the matchup there. So if Mooney were active, he would definitely be a low-end flex play. Someone that I would like to be able to put into my fantasy lineup in deeper leagues. But if he is not active, obviously that just kind of pushes aggressive target share towards Drake London, makes Kyle Pitts more relevant. And then if you're in super deep leagues or looking at DFS, Ray McLeod would be somewhere that you could go as well. Shout out to my Clemson buddy. I always point the wrong way. Shout out to my Clemson buddy there, Ray McLeod. All right, let me answer a few more questions here before we dive into more of the mailbag questions. I see you guys in the chat. Let's see. We got here from Razzie820. Hopefully I see you. Oh, I'm not. I won't be on the Yahoo Sunday show this year. There were some changes. I will be live. I haven't talked to you guys about my schedule this year. Probably should have done that. But one thing I'm going to do that I have done a terrible job at in the past is I have a link tree on all my social media sites, and one of the links in there is an actual calendar that shows all the times that I will go live throughout the entire week. So on Sunday, I will be live in two places. I will have I think it's a 10 a.m. EST live with Fantasy Pros on, I want to say Instagram, and then an hour and a half later, something like that, on TikTok, I believe. But yeah, so I'll be live multiple times on Sunday, but it'll be on Fantasy Pros social media this year. And then question from Razzle820. Flex, Jameson Williams or RJ Harvey? So I would go with Jameson. And I'm not opposed to playing RJ Harvey if you have to this week, even though when we're looking at it in theory, the split, we don't know specifically, but we do know that J.K. Dobbins is going to be operating as the lead back. I still have Harvey ranked as someone who is a flex option because of the receiving upside that he would have. I was actually, let's see, I don't know if I have this. Actually, let me think of it off the top of my head, because I was writing an article on the Broncos, and I can't remember exactly what I was looking at, but or what I was writing it for. But in short, The Broncos' backfield was absolutely awful last season, but one thing that kind of goes overlooked is they targeted running backs at one of the highest clips last year compared to all the other teams in the NFL. I think they were fifth in terms of most targets to running backs. The problem is that the running backs simply were not productive with them because it was just a bad group overall, unfortunately. No offense to them, but they just didn't. They had the opportunities, they just didn't produce with it. When you look at the amount of targets that they had to the running back position in that offense, knowing the fact that while they did make additions in terms of drafting Pat Bryant and adding Evan Ingram, they didn't make any kind of blockbuster changes, right? If they had drafted, now they wouldn't have the ability to do this, but if they had drafted a Tetairoa McMillan in there to play opposite of Cortland Sutton, you would say, okay, there's obviously going to potentially be some target share adjustments within that offense. But for the most part, I would expect them to continue to aggressively target running backs. And while J.K. Dobbins, you know what? I actually was going to talk about this on the show. That's where I was researching that stat. So perfect. While J.K. Dobbins obviously operates as a 3-down back, he has the ability to catch. Statistically, it's just checkdowns that he's never actually been highly productive with. Like if you look at his receiving stats from a year-to-year basis, last year was the most, and there's reasons for that. Obviously, the injuries to him has kind of limited the upside that he's been able to have from a receiving perspective. But last year he had 32 receptions, 38 targets, produced only 153 yards. So he's a guy that gets checkdowns, but he's just not particularly not that he's not explosive, but he's not explosive and dynamic with those targets. When we look at RJ Harvey, that is somebody like consistently throughout the offseason that the Broncos, that Sean Payton, that Bo Nix have all talked so glowingly about from his route running in his hands from a pass catching perspective. So I expect them to utilize him in creative ways, get those targets to Harvey because they know what he can do in the open field is just so much different than anybody else that they have on the team. So I think that if he can take that target share that they had and were wildly ineffective with last year and translate that, that's the vision, right? That's the vision that we want for him to be that Alvin Kamara in the offense, right? So for right now, just give it a week so we can see if you have the ability and you've got a stable player like Jameson Williams, start him because you know that there's a certain level of floor and upside. And the matchup again with Green Bay is expected to be bountiful in terms of points. So it's a safer play than seeing what kind of role Harvey has within the offense. So you have the luxury of not having to deal with that. Harvey could pop off in week 1, but avoid it if you have the ability to with a guy like Jameson Williams. From Shorty, I picked the Packers defense in the draft, but how easy the 49ers schedule, with how easy the 49ers schedule is this season, are they a better option, especially with the Packers tough week 1 matchup? I don't mind the matchup so much because the Packers are a team that it's gonna be bountiful in terms of points. But again, I talked about earlier in the live that I'm comfortable with it because of the fantasy points that they can score from creating turnovers and having impact plays. So I'm okay with starting them in week 1. If you want to pick up the 49ers, because it is a good schedule, right? If you want to pick up the 49ers and go that direction, I have no issue with that. Either one is fine for me. In terms of rankings, the way that I have them right now, San Francisco is significantly higher this week. So if you're going apples to apples, I've got San Francisco ranked right now as my 7th overall defense. So I would head that direction. From Fantasy Football 2025, a start-sit question for week 1. And the question is Tyrone Tracy or JSN in my flex spot? JSN for sure. I don't hate Tyrone Tracy Jr. this week. I'm pro-ish Tyrone Tracy Jr. Particularly over Scatabo because Giants are going to be playing from behind. That benefits Tracy from a receiving perspective. That's what he's excellent at. I just don't think there's going to be, especially when you just, not only this week, but just in general, when you look at the schedule for the Giants, they're just going to be playing from behind. It's rough, and I think you don't want, from a rushing perspective, the upside, it's going to have to lean towards Tyrone Tracy. But again, that said, JSN, absolutely 100%. For me, he is ranked. Let me see how quickly my internet can update and get my wide receiver rankings. He is ranked as my wide receiver 13 this week. It's an absolute must start for me, even though I do like Tyrone Tracy. From Armando Hernandez, who would you start? Amarian Hampton or Henderson in week 1? That's perfect because we were just on the subject of Amarian Hampton and Najee Harris. I do have Amarian Hampton ranked higher, and it's tough, unfortunately, because from a matchup perspective, now granted, I do think Vegas's defense should be a little bit better this year, and so the matchup for Henderson isn't a 100% layup. But while Kansas City's defense is definitely the tougher matchup, particularly against the run, again, I'm not convinced there's going to be a massive workload from Najee Harris. I still think the snaps will lean towards Hampton. I think it's the safer floor pick there. Probably a higher ceiling there for Henderson, but safer floor pick for Hampton. And then from Kbala 32, and then we're going to take a quick break here for a word from our sponsors. New streamer hit the like. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate. Yeah. If you can like the show, share the show, appreciate it. That would be amazing. And then for PPR, Emeka, Egbuka, or Henderson in flex. Thanks for the advice. I'm pro Egbuka this week. And I've actually got quite a bit of stuff that I wanted to talk about because he is probably the most common player that I've seen in start sits this year so far for week 1, just because there's a lot of mystery around what we can actually expect from him in terms of volume. Pro Mike Evans, he is the wide receiver 1 in that offense. But when we look at him in Egbuka playing off of him as the wide receiver 2, I think we can look at him as a very safe option, actually, in terms of a floor, just because we need to remember that Jalen McMillan is out in addition to Chris Godwin. And while there are obviously other depth pieces in that offense, in that receiving core, none that really compare to Egbuka. So I think he should actually get a fairly good amount of target share, even in his first game as a rookie. And then when we look at that matchup, that's what I really love about him this week and why I feel comfortable moving him up higher in the rankings. When we look at that matchup of Tampa Bay and Atlanta, I'm obsessed with that matchup. I love like literally almost every piece in that matchup from a fantasy perspective and from a DFS perspective. But Atlanta's defense, while I like Atlanta's defense in the path that they took in terms of trying to reinforce that defense through the draft, I think it's going to be more of something that develops over the course of the year, kind of similar to like the Rams defense last year. Started off getting lit up, right? But as their rookies started to really acclimate, pull themselves together, they became an absolute menace on defense. And I hope, and I think that's the direction that Atlanta is going to have with these rookie investments that they made that I really, really love. But to begin the season, I think they're going to be the same level of exploitable that they were last year. They gave up bountiful points to opposing wide receivers. So I like Egbuka this week in week 1 as a flex option over Henderson, just because while Henderson, again, good ceiling potential, I would just rather go ahead and avoid the committee situation there if you've got a guy like Emeka that is going to have a certain level of targets. All right, before we move on, because we've got a lot of comments from the chat, and then we've got mailbag questions as well, I am going to do a quick word from our sponsors here. We'll be right back. We'll be right back after this.
If you play in Dynasty, you need Dynasty Deluxe, our premium package for Dynasty Leaguers. We rank over 300 players, updated every week, all year long. And there's a win now mode and a rebuild mode with Superflex and tight end premium controls. and a Dynasty League sync, where you can say, sync down all of my sleeper teams, all my FFPC teams, and then you can browse around your leagues for who has needs, and then you can use our trade finder to see what kinds of trades are happening in leagues that are similar to the one I want to do. Then you can analyze trades using our trade analyzer, which balances the lifetime value, which includes pick values out to like 2028. All of that plus the rookie guide $25 value is included. So if you're just in one Dynasty League, Dynasty Deluxe is well worth it. And use your host's promo code, and you can bump up to All In and get $25 off.
By the way, your host promo code is super simple. It's Tera, Tera. They made it super easy. You can get the Dynasty Deluxe package, the All-In package. If you use my promo code, you get $25 off. There's a lot of packages for Player Profiler. I actually was just using the DFS tool, which is pretty cool because I like using tools. DFS is more fun when you get to play around with lineups and experiment. And I was working on that today, so that was super fun. So you can use my promo code if you want to get any of that. But jumping back here to the chat and the mailbag questions here, I'm going to jump back to the chat in a second, and I'm going to get in a mailbag question here. Let's see. I think I'll start us off with one because we've been on the TreVeyon Henderson train, right? And again, in addition to, I talked about Emeka Egbuka being one of the most common start-sit questions for me this week when it comes to those kind of guys that we're feeling like, okay, they've got upside. We've got a lot of hype around them. Do we trust them to start them in week one? These rookies that we've got a lot of question marks around. And TreVeyon Henderson pops up just as much as anybody. So I got a mailbag question from Jerry Nelson at FedEx 595. Pacheco or Henderson in PPR? I'm not sure how not sure how Henderson will be in his first NFL game. I like this question because I actually have this decision to make in a dynasty league between Pacheco and Henderson. So I will answer this in my stance on this from a personal perspective as well as what I'm actually doing. The question that we're having here with all of these is, are we willing to risk it all with Henderson in week one? And Henderson, obviously, when we look at him, he is the higher upside play. But spoiler alert, between Pacheco and Henderson, I would go with Pacheco. I have Pacheco ranked just a tiny bit higher because, again, we're feeling solid on him again as the lead back. And one thing that we underestimate with Pacheco in this offense is the fact that he did operate as a 3-down back before he went down with the injury, and then everything went sideways. And when he came back, he just really didn't look like himself. And that happens. I give grace to running backs who come back from major injuries, like, breaking something. He did the best he could, but it's often that we see those dips in performances. He's far enough removed from that. And everything that we're hearing out of him is that he's back to the pre-injury form that we saw before. So he's a very solid floor player here. And I like the matchup here in terms of him getting good volume, and especially with the thought process that they might lean on the ground game. Excuse me. They might lean on the ground game a little bit more this week because we've got Rashee Rice out, but we also have Jalen Royals dealing with an injury. So they're oddly thin in that receiving core, considering the investments that they made. I'm kind of curious as a whole to see how they utilize players outside of Xavier Worthy and Hollywood Brown, who I believe would step up to that wide receiver 2 role, but they need something else, right? They can lean aggressively on Travis Kelce, but I'm thinking that running backs might be pushed a little bit more into the pass game. So that can also benefit Pacheco as well. But when we're looking at Henderson, he's such a tough one for me to rank this week in terms of being a flex option because it's very situational of who you're bumping him up against. If you're bumping him up against a player that offers a more stable baseline, then you got to go with the more stable option. If you're bumping him up against a player that is another high risk option, like if you were comparing a TreVeyon Henderson to an RJ Harvey, that is a situation where I think you lean towards Henderson because as a running back, he is a low-end RB2 this week because of his receiving upside and the fact that his committee is not as ambiguous as the other rookie committees, right? We'll put Amari Hampton aside just because at this point he's leading that backfield, especially with Najee coming back into the role. We don't know exactly what kind of level of snap count he'll be on this week, just because it feels like a fairly quick turnaround from when he returned from practice. But if you look at RJ Harvey, you look at a Caleb Johnson, right? You look at a Cam Scatabo, right? When you look at TreVeyon Henderson, you can just automatically expect a 50-50 split. It's not a major issue as it is compared to other offenses. And the reason for that, in terms of it not being a major issue, is that we know exactly what Josh McDaniels wants to do and how he wants to run this backfield. Even in week one, he wants it to be a true committee. And the Patriots under Josh McDaniels have done a very specific split in terms of the early down work and then some carries, but also receiving work going to a separate back. So when we're looking at Henderson, we know that he is going to have the opportunity to be on the field in a split capacity, in a 50-50 capacity, and have that receiving upside. So provided that you're not playing in a standard league, if you're in at least half PPR, you should at least get a nice baseline level of some receptions there. So it's not going to be a situation where the split is like a 40% split and you get kind of panicked and it doesn't end up the way that you want it to. So for me, he's kind of got a nice baseline of like double-digit fantasy points in PPR to feel comfortable with. It's just a matter of whether or not he can get a touchdown. So I'm not opposed to starting Henderson in general. There are situations where I can lean into it, but when you have a back with a known lead back role, a 3-down role, you just go ahead and lean into that. So bumping up Pacheco against Henderson, that is where I would lean to. Now, if you're looking at another situation, we had a mailbag question from Anonymous Citizen at Anonymous IA on Twitter. Week 1 flex spot, choice between a wide variety of options here. TreVeyon Henderson, Matthew Golden, Stephon Diggs, Calvin Ridley, Isiah Pacheco, or Travis Etienne. There's a lot going on right here. So, I mean, we can break it down in terms of looking at all of these players. We've got the rookies with the unknown volume in Henderson and Golden. Again, if you're putting Henderson and Golden next to each other, as of right now, I would lean towards Henderson just because I feel like the Packers could lean more heavily on Josh Jacobs in this matchup. My opinion might change again if we for sure get Jayden Reed out, but as of right now, if I were bumping those two up together, it would be Henderson. Then in this question, you've got Stephon Diggs, who again is the wide receiver 1. We did get confirmation that he will be playing in a full capacity, not on a snap count. Then we've got Calvin Ridley, who is a wide receiver 1 volume opportunity, but rookie quarterback, bad team. But the big problem with Calvin Ridley, and I'm seeing his name pop up a good bit, the problem is because on any other week, right, I would be like, oh yeah, Calvin Ridley, wide receiver 2, no problem, not an issue. High-end flex option. Problem is he's playing Denver this week, the place where receivers just go to get shut down, in a place where I think could be even more aggressive against the pass this year with the investment that they made into their secondary, massive investment into their secondary. So that's a major issue. Then we talked about Pacheco and then Travis Etienne, who, quite frankly, when I'm looking at Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby, it is a mess of a situation that I do not want to deal with in week 1 if I don't have to. We're talking about guys that are essentially co-starters, which is so crazy to me because I feel like, going back to the draft, the discount in terms of ADP that we were getting on Tank Bigsby, who arguably should have been drafted next to a Jordan Mason in terms of a guy who was anticipating getting like a 50-50 split. I thought we were getting a good discount on him. I'm surprised he was not more of a darling in the draft. I think maybe that had to do with like rookie fever of Bashal Tutin and kind of this perception that Tank Bigsby is a tank, and he's not. Again, I've said it before. Tank Bigsby and Travis Etienne are almost the exact same size. He is not a tank. That is a misleading nickname. He's not a little back, but he's not a Derrick Henry or even a Josh Jacobs or a David Montgomery. So, and he did have pass catching upside in college. So I don't want to touch Travis Etienne if I don't have to, because I am very concerned that Tank Bigsby just significantly outperformed Travis Etienne last season. He, I won't say he outperformed him during OTAs and preseason, just because they both looked fairly good, right? But I will say that all it takes is for Bigsby to continue to showcase that he is perfectly fine from a pass catching perspective, and it could be a shutdown situation. And we know that when we look at Liam Cohen, look at last year with Bucky Irving and Rashad White, he can use a hot hand. I think that's what he's going to do in terms of just using the hot hand. And on any given week, until somebody truly steps in and just takes that job and shoves somebody out like Bucky Irving did in the back half of the season to Rashad White, I don't know if it's going to be that fun of a backfield. So in terms of reliably knowing who's going to have the highest upside on a week-to-week basis, so I don't want to touch Travis Etienne. Again, when you're looking at this grouping, Isiah Pacheco is probably the safest option here. I don't know if I want to risk it quite yet in terms of Stephon Diggs. I think he's a decent flex option, but again, if you have another direction that you can go with, I would go there. Pacheco is the guy that would get the edge there for me, for sure. Going to jump back here to the chat here. Thank you, Amazon Pancakes, for the positive comments. Oh, I like this question here from Shorty. How do we feel about Dak tomorrow against the Eagles? Is it worth pivoting to a streamer like Trevor Lawrence instead? I'm still okay with starting Dak. And the reason for that is that it's a volume play, right? I don't have a lot of confidence in the Cowboys' run game. Now, from a fantasy perspective, I have confidence that Javonte Williams is the lead back. Because at this point, Miles Sanders doesn't look like he's going to be a factor. He'd been dealing with the injury, right? Then we had Phil Maffa, who actually did look good in preseason. Shout out again to my Clemson boy. Actually did look good, a big-bodied running back that I think in an ideal world, if I could align the Cowboys backfield, I would say you should go with a Phil Maffa early down, and then have change of pace with Jayden Blue, kind of in the mold of what they had with Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard when it was really effective. I'm saying, in an ideal world, if they could go that direction, that makes sense for them in terms of the most pop to their run offense. But it's going to be Javonte Williams in a 3-down capacity there. And they're going to want to run the ball. Brian Schottenheimer has been very vocal about the fact that he wants to run the ball down people's throats. I don't believe you can do it, Brian. You can try, but I think at the end of the day, they're going to have to throw significantly, and we're going to see good volume from Dak. So even in bad matchups early, I'm willing to forego that and just go ahead and play Dak, because if we've got aggressive pass volume, what they're going to have to do, because the run game, even if it's okay, they're going to have to keep pace with the Eagles offense, which is going to be firing on all cylinders against a Dallas defense that, lost Micah Parsons. I'm a Packers fan. I like Kenny Clark. Hopefully that will help their defense in certain ways, but overall, it was a loss for their defense significantly. So the Cowboys are going to be chasing points. There's going to be volume. And now Dak doesn't just have CeeDee Lamb. He has George Pickens too. Oh my God. And they're finally giving a little bit of something out of wide receiver 3, because it's not having to operate as the wide receiver 2. And then you've also got Jake Ferguson. So from that perspective, I think Dak is fine in terms of volume. And that's the thing about Dak. As long as he's been healthy, he has been a fine volume quarterback there. So I would still go with Dak. That said, as Amazon Pancakes said, the Eagles are going to rock the Cowboys. I agree with that one right there, unfortunately. And then I'll show your comment here again that Harvey's going to have a great year. Peyton loves him. Yeah, and I'm really excited. I think we might have, I don't know if we have a mailbag question here. I should have double checked. So just off the top of my head in terms of Dobbins and Harvey. But if not, I can talk about that at some point. Let's see. Oh my gosh, did we really get break? No, we didn't. We did not get breaking news here. Very funny. That happens though. I've gotten breaking news in the middle of a podcast, and then you get your notes on, and you're trying not to have your notifications on, and then all of a sudden something's popping off, and it goes crazy. It would be just wild. From Kate Russell, Waddle or George Pickens. Let me be very specific and go to my rankings because off the top of my head, I want to say that I have Pickens higher, but let me double check. I have Waddle higher. I have Waddle higher. And that is more so probably a matchup thing there against Indianapolis. That's a weird game for me. I like that game in terms because I was actually looking at that for DFS because there's some pieces in there that I like. But we're anticipating that Waddle will have an increased role, and I'm hoping that we should see that right off the bat because what the output that he gave last year with Jonnu Smith on the team, that was a really unfortunate situation from a fantasy perspective. It was fun for Jonnu Smith, but it was terrible because the volume was just stripped away from everyone else, particularly Jayden Waddle. So I like this matchup. Indianapolis's defense has been very generous to wide receivers. Obviously, we've got Tyreek Hill that's been dealing with that oblique injury. Devon Achane that's been dealing with the calf injury. Oddly enough, Jalen Waddle is the healthiest person there, which is unusual because he's usually not the healthiest person. But Waddle is the one that I have ranked higher. From John Flowers, should I start Egbuka or Harvey in my flex spot this week? That one, again, for me, I lean towards Egbuka on that one. Just because, again, with him being the wide receiver too in that offense, the lack of competition that he will have with not just Chris Godwin being out, but Jalen McMillan, I think, is a big piece of that as well, because that essentially means that we'll have a very funneled target share with Mike Evans and Emeka. So I actually feel oddly comfortable with him. So it's Emeka Egbuka that I would prefer there. From Larry. Walker, JSN, McMillan need one in PPR. JSN, even off the top of my head, JSN is the guy that I have ranked higher there. It is close between him and Walker, but ultimately, JSN is the one that I would go with there. I liked what I saw in terms of, we didn't see like a ton of Seattle's first team offense in preseason, but from what we did see, the offensive line and the depth at offensive line did look better than I thought it was going to be. I was very concerned that the offensive line was going to be a major issue. And that was not just me being negative towards them. Just when you look across the board at obviously super reputable sites like PFF and whatnot, any place that was doing offensive line rankings and grades consistently had Seattle towards the bottom there. So that was kind of like a known concern, but they showed better in preseason. So I feel a little bit better about the potential of Sam Darnold staying upright all season, which is critical. And JSN is really the dominating target there. Cooper Kupp is cool, right? But when we look at Cooper Kupp and JSN, they should play very well off of each other. We like JSN to get out there in more of that DK Metcalf role, get downfield, and we can have Cooper Kupp in the slot a little bit more here. We want to see some more creativity with JSN. That's really where we got our pop from him last season from a fantasy perspective. So I'm feeling good about him heading into week 1 for sure. From Amazon Pancakes, drafted Cam Ward as my backup and Bo Nix as my starter. Would you drop Ward for Penix or JJ McCarthy rest of season? I really like both McCarthy and Penix's offense. Torn. I would for sure drop him and pick up JJ McCarthy. JJ McCarthy is the one that, in terms of backup quarterbacks, streaming options, that's the one that I consistently lean towards. I've talked about it before on the show. The thing that I love about JJ McCarthy is him being in that Minnesota offense. I'm a big believer in anything that stems from Sean McVay, and those systems are just so friendly for quarterbacks. And Kevin O'Connell has, whatever he has adapted from there has turned into the ultimate soft landing spot for quarterbacks. You can see it directly when Kirk Cousins was cool, right? He was cool. But when Kevin O'Connell came in, that is where you saw his numbers shoot up consistently. We saw it last year with Sam Darnold. So I don't really care that JJ McCarthy is a first-year starter. I love anybody that is within Kevin O'Connell's offense. And when you look at the offense as a whole, he just has so many weapons, right? We're getting Jordan Addison back soon. It's just a 3-game suspension. It's not a big deal. Now we've got Adam Thielen in to help out from a wide receiver 3 perspective, although he'll be wide receiver 2 while Addison is out. But that was a good addition for them because they were suffering injuries at that wide receiver 3 spot. They just really needed to shore that up. Then you have Aaron Jones from a pass catching perspective. So overall, man, that offense is going to produce. We also have not seen JJ. Well, I think we saw like a tiny bit, but we've got to remember JJ McCarthy has legs, right? He can run. So he can give us that little bit of Bo Nix upside that we got last year. That was fun, right? When you can throw in that additional rushing perspective right on top of the touchdown. So I feel really, really good about him. Now that's not an insult to Cam Ward, right? Ward just does not have the same potential upside. Not the same. I'd say, McCarthy's a little bit better of a runner as well. The overall receiving core is better. System, line, it's all just an upgrade. So, no offense to Cam Ward. I think he'll be perfectly fine. But he looked good and competent in preseason. I was happy for him. He got out there and he looked fine. But it's still going to be a journey for him in Tennessee because it's Tennessee, right? And Penix I like too as a streaming option. But if I'm picking between Penix and McCarthy, it's an easy lean for McCarthy for me. From Shorty. Oh, perfect. We're talking about Tennessee, so that's perfect. What are the realistic expectations for Alec Ayermaner this week or year after being named the starter? It feels like we are getting Puka light here. I was very happy to see him named as the starter. Just because I felt like it didn't really make a lot of sense because I'm like, okay, it's quickly enough he will push Van Jefferson out of the way because we know that Van is not. Unfortunately, his career is very, it is what it is. He's just not that dude. So him pushing Van Jefferson out was inevitable. I'm happy that it happened in week 1 so we can see him right off the bat. From an expectation in terms of fantasy perspective, he's a guy that we want to, for sure, keep on our bench. But we have to remember that this offense is going to go through some growing pains. Now, granted, Tennessee made investments into their offensive line. They're trying to put Cam Ward in the best situation, but they started from the bottom and they're working their way up here. So it is going, much like when, Trevor Lawrence, Caleb Williams, when these Bryce Young, right? When these guys get drafted first overall, and they're on these terrible teams that have to find themselves. At the very least, hopefully the coaching staff is a bit more competent than what a lot of these young quarterbacks have had to deal with. But it takes time for them to consistently be able to find themselves. So I like Ayermaner. We just need to be patient. I wouldn't put him into starting lineup now. Just give it some time there. But hold on to him because we could get a nice little 1-2 punch there with him and Calvin Ridley for sure. I'm going to do a mailbag question here from Fantasy Burner 12 on Twitter. 12 team, 3 wide receiver, flex option, half PPR. No, wait. That's the settings. 3 wide receiver, flex, and half PPR. So the question is a draft question. Oh, that's right. This is a draft question. Should I start? And they're drafting the first pick that they would have is Jamar Chase, right? So should they start off the draft with Jamar, a running back, Josh Allen, and then 2 wide receivers, or Jamar, running back, wide receiver, running back, and then target Bo Nix, Kyler Murray, or Brock Purdy? later once you get into the mid rounds, around 7th or so. Because this fantasy manager is thinking that they need one running back in the first 3 rounds before it gets thin. And obviously they're 100% sure they're taking Jamar first. I have been very much so pro for anyone that is still pushing their draft to the very last minute. I'm very much so pro grab your RB1 as early as possible. So if you are drafting a wide receiver in the first, like Jamar, your second pick needs to be a running back. And unfortunately, more than likely, that means that you will have to fade quarterback, right? And it depends. Now, granted, it could get back around to you where you can probably not get a Josh Allen, but maybe you could swing around and get a Jalen Hurts or maybe Jayden Daniels. It depends, right? But running back has been so critical for me to get make sure that I have running back locked down early in terms of an RB1 and getting my second running back by the 6th round. That's last call right there. Question from DK843 at DK68203 on Twitter. Not a start sit question, but where do you land on the Giants and Broncos backfield? And this is perfect because we've had a lot of RJ Harvey questions. In the draft, I did have RJ Harvey, not in the draft like the NFL draft. In my draft rankings, I did have RJ Harvey ranked significantly higher than J.K. Dobbins. And we can squabble on the early season rankings. They're essentially Harvey and Dobbins are back-to-back. I think that's pretty common viewpoint in terms of other fantasy analysts from what I seen, that ultimately either one of them could have the stronger play. They're both more of an RB3 flex play option because we truly need to see what Sean Payton is going to do before we can make that big commitment. But when we're looking at the season as a whole, that's where you give that massive edge to RJ Harvey. Because as we talked about earlier, when I was doing another question, the advantage that Harvey could have in this offense from a receiving perspective is so incredibly high. The Denver backfield, again, was terrible last season, but they threw at a ridiculous clip to the running backs. They just were not effective with actually doing anything with their receptions, unfortunately. So ultimately, Harvey just has so much upside. I don't dislike J.K. Dobbins because he can still be something in this offense. I think we all, especially me, want at some point to see the Sean Payton offense get to a beautiful Sean Payton backfield where we've got 2 running backs that are viable on a weekly basis from a fantasy perspective. And they can get there for sure. But ultimately, the higher upside goes with Harvey. And then you also have to, unfortunately, it was good that we had at least the majority of the season played by J.K. Dobbins last year, who, by the way, should have won Comeback Player of the Year. I've got a bone to pick with that award and the qualifications for it. I want to see an actual comeback, and I don't understand what comeback story was stronger than J.K. Dobbins. That don't make a lot of sense to me. No offense, Joe Burrow, but J.K. Dobbins should have won that. But at the end of the day, we do have to be skeptical of his longevity in a season, just because playing a full season just has never really been his thing, unfortunately. So from that perspective, it also gives that extra edge to RJ Harvey. Now, the Giants backfield. I touched on that one a little bit here, but with the Giants backfield, it's very simple for me. I have to have a reason when it comes to an incumbent running back. Let's use Kyren Williams as an example. And that's not the best example because Kyren was so much more relied on by the Rams from a real football perspective than Tyrone Tracy was last year for the Giants. So I don't think Tracy's job security is as secure as that of Kyren Williams. But just to make a little comparison there, when Kyren Williams was getting his additional backfield mate drafted in Blake Corum, people were very, very quick to push Kyren Williams out because you get somebody drafted and you want to give the edge to the rookie, right? And it often just doesn't pan out that way because you have to have a reason for losing your job. Like that was last year with James Conner and Trey Benson. You have to have a reason for losing your job. And I don't think that Tyrone Tracy has given a reason to lose the job, especially when you consider that, again, as I said before, he has the advantage when it comes to that pass catching upside, and the Giants are going to be playing from behind. So I don't have a lot of interest in Scatterbo, especially because where his ADP is being drafted, it's too high for me. And so regardless of like draft or anything in that, I just was not a fan and don't have him rostered anywhere just because I would have rather gone with a plethora of people, a Tank Bigsby, a Braylon Allen, a Jordan Mason. Those are all guys going around the same area who I could just make far better arguments for. So the backfield in New York belongs to Tracy, in my opinion. We'll have some tandem production there. The good thing, at least for Scatterbo, is that from a handcuff perspective, I would consider him the more direct handcuff because I just don't think Singletary has a lot to offer, right? Doing another mailbag question here. Again, we got these Emeka Egbuka questions here from Shannon Sharp, not the actual real Shannon Sharp on Twitter. Start Ford or Egbuka, half PPR. Again, when it comes to Egbuka, we talked about the fact that he does have a fairly safe floor. I have him projected for about 5 receptions. And PPR, that more than likely is going to get you to double-digit fantasy points. So there's a safe floor there for him, even if he does not get a touchdown. I love him in DFS this week. I just think there's a lot of value there. So for me, it's a super easy one. It's Emeka. I don't trust Jerome Ford. If we want to touch on this Cleveland backfield, we don't have confirmation yet that Quinshon Judkins is going to be with the team this week. They keep saying it could come this week. It could come. Well, it's Wednesday, and I have a hard time believing that we're going to be getting him on the field this week. That doesn't make a lot of logical sense. He's a rookie. That does not make a lot of logical sense. He was away with the team, was not in contract, yeah. So when we're looking at that Cleveland backfield with Jerome Ford and Dylan Sampson, the reps were ambiguous in camp. I don't feel comfortable saying that Ford is the starter who will get the bulk of the carries. I think it could be very split between him and Sampson, and that Sampson would have the higher upside there. Moving on, I'm going to do one more mailbag question here. And it is from Mendez at Aldo Mendez 1 on Twitter. Flex 1. TreVeyon Henderson, Emeka Egbuka, Tetairoa McMillan, DJ Moore, Ricky Pearsall, or George Pickens. That is part 1 of the question. So on that one, again, a ton of options to work with. I actually have, because I've said like Emeka like 20,000 times, right? But I actually have Tet McMillan ranked higher than him this week in PPR. Out of this grouping, I would go with McMillan. I mean, there's a lot of interesting options here that you've got. You've got safety if you wanted to go with a stronger veteran presence in terms of DJ Moore. But at the end of the day, McMillan is the wide receiver 1 there. You guys know that I love Jalen Coker. And so my dreams, it's not over for the whole season, but my early season dreams of Jalen Coker season, cokeheads is what Jalen Coker fans like to call themselves. Those dreams are crushed right now, unfortunately. But that does at least mean, while we will have increased targets for Xavier Legette, that does at least mean that I think we have like a very aggressive funnel to McMillan here. So I'm ready to see McMillan. I like the matchup again on this one in terms of volume against Jacksonville for sure. And Then the second part of this question is tight end question, Tucker Kraft or Tyler Warren. So for me, this one comes down to whether or not Jayden Reed is able to go this week. Because as of right now, I have Tyler Warren higher. But if Jayden Reed does not go, I would go with Tucker Kraft on that one. Going here to the chat, finishing out some of these questions here. Yeah, from Dennis Rodriguez. I'll show that question, even though it's painful, or that statement, even though it's painful. The Clemson versus LSU game wasn't what we were hoping for. It wasn't. Yeah, Cade, some of those balls were a little bit high. I don't know if he was just nervous or something. It's just, it wasn't it. Loss of the receiver was a major issue, but at the end of the day, that should have been a different outcome. But man, I gotta tell you, from a fantasy perspective, that LSU tight end, man, 6'7", that man can jump. Keep our eye on that one for the future. We love to look at our tight ends in college and try and figure out who the next receiving tight end superstar is for us. Let's get some more questions here in the chat. Fight Freak Clark. Hey, Tara, pick one. Flex, non-PPR, McConkey, Hall, Henderson, leaning towards Henderson. In non-PPR, I still actually lean towards Lad McConkey on that one. Definitely not Hall. I can give the edge on Hall over Henderson in full PPR. But the fact that it's non-PPR, I'm just going to go with the highest volume play and the guy with the highest touchdown opportunity. And I do think that is actually Lad McConkey there. From Andrew Burwell, would you start Ridley or Pearsall flex half PPR? That one is tough for me. I'm actually going to go to, I think I have Ridley. I don't. And that's a matchup thing. I think I talked about it a little bit earlier. On any other week, I would have Ridley higher. But given the matchup with Denver, I would go ahead and start Pearsall. I know people are like skeptical of Pearsall's production. I will say that on that one drive he had with Brock Purdy preseason, because we didn't get a lot, right? But he was targeted very aggressively on that drive, and he looked good. He's the wide receiver one here. I like Juwan Jennings, but Ricky Pearsall is my wide receiver one there. So it's Ricky Pearsall that I would start in half PPR over Ridley, given the matchup. It's matchup that is the issue there. From Nathan Neely, should I stack Dak since CD is my wide receiver one, or go with Bo Nix? Yeah, I kind of lean towards going with, and I'm assuming it's not a draft question, just you have both of these guys. I still lean towards going with Bo Nix. I do have Nix higher. How much higher do I have him? Not significantly. It's a gap, like a 5-player gap there. But I would go with Bo Nix. Matchup is not a major concern for me. I still do like Dak as a streaming option this week, depending on where you drafted him. But I would still lean towards Bo Nix on that one. Dennis Rodriguez, my breaking news would be bet Taylor Swift for the Super Bowl halftime show. Just makes sense after the engagement. Yeah, I might be with you on that one. It's personally, it's not the halftime show that I want, but I think there's a good chance that could happen. The NFL and Taylor Swift. From SXPES, DK or Pickens this week? That is a good question, because DK is in a matchup problem against New York, the Jets. I still lean towards going with DK just because from a fantasy perspective, like when you look at teams with shutdown corners, now technically things could change because the Jets were a hot mess last year after they fired Robert Saleh, but I feel less inclined to aggressively punish, particularly because Aaron Rodgers is going to come out and obviously want to target DK like a menace, regardless of who he's matched up with in this matchup here. It's an Aaron Rodgers revenge game. So I still have DK ranked higher, even though the matchup is tougher here. Ooh, good question here. From Amazon. If you had to pick one league winner this year, who would your choice be? It's Ricky Pearsall. That's my boy. Yeah, because I look at league winners, and technically Cortland Sutton could also qualify a little bit there. Love Cortland Sutton, but those are my two guys this year. But Ricky Pearsall is the one that I get why people are hesitant here, but you gotta remember, like, you can't fault him for the production that he had last season. One, he didn't get that preseason prep, right? Because, well, we know what happened. He was shot. And then in addition to that, he also had a hamstring injury that he was dealing with as well. So we're talking about a guy who had to come in and ramp up mid-season, was inserted into an offense where he was not the wide receiver one, and they did not intend for him to be the wide receiver one of this team. Keep that in mind. They never prepped Pearsall to be the wide receiver one last year. Their intention was to ride with Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel and George Kittle, obviously, as well. And that was the core for the year. And then they were moving on from one player. Obviously, that ended up being Deebo Samuel. That was their plan. Their plan was to have Ricky Pearsall not involved last year and then elevate him and rely on him this year. So I am trusting Kyle Shanahan from that perspective. I like what we did see, that tiny little sample that we got out of Ricky Pearsall, but that's not what is driving me to believe he's a league winner. I truly believe that he was intended to be the volume wide receiver one of this offense, playing off of Brandon Ayuk, who is more of the lower volume, big play touchdown guy, right? So Pearsall, even when Brandon Ayuk comes back, I think is still going to be the better volume play in this offense for me. So it's Ricky Pearsall that I love. If we're looking at a running back league winner type, I feel like it's kind of maybe mundane to say, but Tank Bigsby eventually pushing out. And when we look at league winner, not right off the bat, I think it'll take some time to get there, but eventually pushing Travis Etienne out of the way and taking over in that backfield there. And we know how profitable that role can be in Liam Cohen's offense. I love your sleeper, though, of Amazon Pancakes, of Dante Thornton. Love him in Vegas there. Amazon is saying that that was the draft question. Chase, 3 running backs, and then Bo Nix in round 6. That's wonderful. From Dennis Rodriguez, CMC wins comeback player of the year this season. I think it's very possible. I do. Let's see. We got some more questions here, and then we can wrap things up. Almost all caught up here. Oh, I think they're slightly out of order. So if I got to your question later, I apologize. Sometimes they don't pop up in the correct order for me. A lesson to learn, 12-team PPR. Do I trade Gibbs for Hurts and Cook? I have Herbert and Braylon Allen as my other RB. I still prefer, well, granted, I guess if it was super flex, I'd obviously feel differently. That's fair value, but I still prefer Gibbs, the Gibbs side of that trade. My preference there is that Gibbs side. And the reason for that is that, and first of all, I think you're good with Herbert, just because I do expect a little bit of a bounce back season from him. Ultimately, I don't think he has that top 5 upside for sure. But at the end of the day, we did see a significant turnaround on the back half of the season there. But I like what I'm hearing out of Detroit in terms of them trying to push more volume towards Gibbs, right? Because they're utilizing a committee there. That was the vision of Ben Johnson. But with this change in offensive coordinator, they're not going to make massive changes. But the one thing they've consistently said is wanting to get more volume to Gibbs. So I would hate to miss out on Gibbs. Gibbs is my preferred option there. From Steve's McQueen, keeping with the Emeka questions. So this was out of order. It was earlier. I'm sorry. Emeka, Jameson, or Ridley in my half PPR flex. Oh man. So we're nixing Ridley out of there right away, right? I get here. I'm going to wrap things up soon. I hear a screaming child in the background that's trying to avoid a shower. But we're nixing Ridley out of this right away due to the matchup here. When I'm looking at my rankings, I have Emeka, Egbuka, and Jameson Williams back to back. I have Emeka one spot higher. So I would go with Emeka. It's super close there. But technically speaking, I have Emeka one tiny little spot higher. And that was it. Okay, cool. Good. You're still around. But the timing of my, there's something wrong with where the comments are coming in. I don't know. They don't show up in the perfect order for me. Something with YouTube. All right. Perfect. That was it. I appreciate you guys tuning in. We had a super live chat. I'm loving the live chat, the active chat that we've got going on here. Started last week with the chat kind of picking up here. And then we've continued it through this week. So I love seeing you guys in the chat. Keep up. And we'll be here every single week, 8 p.m. EST, Wednesday nights, live show for about an hour or so. I went a little long here because we had a lot of questions here. But we'll be here all season long as for you to ask your questions away. And as a reminder, this is a podcast, the Dear Miss Fantasy podcast. If you're not subscribed to the podcast, it's on all platforms. If you could subscribe, that would be amazing. It is through Player Profiler. So shout out to Player Profiler. Again, if you were not following and subscribed to them, that would be awesome as well. And if you're in the mood for more subscriptions, of course, me, right? At itsteratime, itsteratime, everywhere, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. I just passed 1,000 subs on my YouTube. So I'm super happy about that. Just started pushing out content consistently over the past couple of months, really. Decided that 2025, but we're going in. So I'll be here consistently with you guys throughout the season, answering your questions. If you ever have any questions, drop them in the comments on videos for sure, and I'll get back to you. Doing waivers, start sits, DFS, all that good stuff. So I appreciate you all tuning in. This was a wonderful audience. It's week 1. Oh my gosh. Yeah, if you have any questions about your starting lineups, just drop them somewhere and I will get to them for sure. Again, good luck with your lineups. I hope we all crush it this week and win. I will talk to you again next week.
Hey, I want to thank you for being part of this broadcast. If you have any thoughts on it, leave a comment. If you enjoyed it, make sure you leave a like. And if you want to see more shows on the Player Profiler channel, subscribe to it. That's how we know you want more.